Good afternoon, everyone. Join us for our monthly Prop Funders community webinar. Absolutely delighted that once again you've taken time out of your busy day, no doubt, to join in. So the first thing I am going to do is actually promote one of our panelists who is in the audience. If I can bring Rosie up, she should be on her way in. It should make it there. And in she comes. There she is, as if by magic, just appears on the screen.
Hi, David. Sorry there. It was I had a Teams invite. It was doing all sorts of things. But I'm here now. Apologies, I'm late.
Yeah, no, no problem at all. Don't start me on Teams versus Zoom. That's a whole subject for a webinar in its own right.
I feel like everyone always has one of the softwares that doesn't work for them, and for me, it's Teams. It just doesn't ever work.
It doesn't want
Um,
to work. Oh, here I understand. So, a massive welcome to Rosie and Paul. So, how are both of you doing today?
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
excellent. Thank you for having me on. Nice to meet you, Paul.
yeah, I'm good, thank you. Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, grand, grand. So what we'll do is we'll just
Yeah.
get straight into it. For those of you who are regulars at this, we record this live. However, the main audience just tunes in separately on our YouTube channel, and obviously watches it in their own time. And then we take a number of short clips from this webinar and we get out on social media, highlighting some of the key learnings, the key education, the key points that are made by the panelists. So delighted for those that have been able to join us live. Please feel free to ask any questions. Stick it into the Q&A. So if you have a question for either Rosie or Paul, stick it in there, and we'll try and get to it in the time that we have. These usually run about 45 minutes, and primarily we try and deep dive into one particular topic, and that's really what we're about today, which is the subject of mitigating property development risk. So, a very important topic for anyone who's involved in development, or indeed if you're an investor and you're looking to invest in a developer or a development. These are sort of things that you might want to consider and make sure that the developer you're investing with has correctly mitigated the risk. So that's the sort of the housekeeping, if you like. I say put any questions you have into the Q&A, and we'll deal with it from there. So let's get on with it. Just quick reminder in terms of prop funders, what are we about? What do we do? Well, our mission, what gets us out of bed in the morning, is saving property developers and investors time and money by structuring, sourcing, and simplifying property funding. So that's what we're about. And of course, anything then to do with property development or investing in property sort of falls under our topics of interest. And we try and deep dive into those, as I say, on a regular basis on our community webinar. So let's get straight in, I think, to our guest today on our subject. So first guest is Paul. Paul, delighted to have you on. We've been working together now for a couple of months on some projects you're working on. Do you want to just take sort of a minute, explain your background, and what is it you're focused on currently in the world of development and refurb?
Oh, thank you again, David, for having me. Yeah, my name is Paul, and as you can tell from my accent, I was not born here. I was born in Africa, Kenya, where I've been doing project for the last nearly 20. I've been a landlord there for the last 20 years, and here in the UK, we primarily focus on converting houses into high-end HM co-living HMOs. So that is 3 or 4 bed to maximum of 6 bed for professional men in need.
Okay, fantastic. Someone's just asked there, should they be logging out from here and watching this on YouTube? No, no, as an audience member, you're just on Zoom currently. It's only for those who want to watch the recording. It's then they can access it whenever they want. But if you're on this now, you're live, much better interaction with the panelists live. So just continue as you are and fire any questions into the Q&A. Yes, thanks very much, Paul. And you've got a bit of a niche as we have discussed, which is quite interesting. So what's your niche? What's your sort of target audience that you're looking to help, if you like, as your USP?
Yeah, we our niche is we normally target professional men that are in need. through divorce or anything. They end up being they're single men. We've seen that when, say, like divorce, when men get divorced, they end up in a very worse situation. They tend to leave their family home to the wife, to the ex-wife, and the children, and they end up living in below uh, standard houses. So that is our niche that
Hmm.
we want to put them back into society and also put them in a community
Yeah,
of people
that can help.
like-minded people
Yeah.
that yeah
Yeah.
yeah
Yeah, which is really
yeah.
good. I think it's a really interesting sort of niche that you have. I know you're laser focused on that, which is always a good thing when it comes to business. So, second guest today is Rosie. I know, Rosie, you're exceptionally busy, but you've managed to free up a wee bit of time. I don't know if this is
Pleasure.
your lunch hour, and you're gonna spend your lunch hour talking to us. But thank you very much for joining us. So we have obviously worked together well a number of years now on particularly this project. But you want to give a quick bit of your background and your experience in property, please?
Yeah, so I'm Rosie Cassidy from Cassidy Homes, small SME house builder focusing on kind of 5 to 25 unit type schemes, kind of in and around the Midlands, based in Coventry myself. I come from a family that have a construction and development background, worked as a land agent, a stamp duty consultant, done new home sales, and I'm in the education sector as well.
Absolutely fantastic. And to say we've been involved with you on the project here in Hall Barn. I put a couple of photographs. We always love this photograph top right with you and your little spud.
Yeah.
And that was taken. When was that? Was just end of last year? Was that on a site visit? When was that?
Um, Yeah, I want to say it was maybe even about October time, just looking up kind of where the construction is.
Yeah.
Maybe September, October time.
Yeah, yeah. So we brought a number of investors. These were private investors that had invested with you. I think we helped you raise about 900,000 of equity for this project. So
Yeah,
some
on
of
this.
those investors wanted to come and you gave them a very detailed sort of review of the project, walked them around, explained where you're up to. I think it was very, very beneficial that day.
Yeah, definitely. It was a great day.
Yeah. Okay. And this project is in Hall Barn in Cambridgeshire. Just if anyone wants to know where it is, and if you follow Rosie on her social media, you'll see her from time to time on this site as it progresses. So feel free to jump in there. So we've got two guests today with sort of differing needs when it comes to risk. But let's get into the topic then for today. So mitigating development risk. And what I've done initially for discussion on both of you, and we'll maybe just to start with you, Rosie, on this one in terms of bigger development sites. But I suppose people sometimes forget that when it comes to risk mitigation, um, there's actually a couple of choices that developers have. They either can accept the risk, just get on with it. They can avoid the risk by just not doing the deal. Or what most tend to do is they try and limit the risk. So, how would you sort of come to approach that risk when it comes to even deciding if a development is viable or not?
Yeah, so I think for me, the biggest needle you can move with risk mitigation is actually just how you buy the site to start with. Because very rarely do you find that it's kind of one big issue that makes a deal go under. It tends to actually be sort of more death by a thousand cuts. And if it is one big issue, the big issue was really that they bought wrong rather than anything else. So for me, it starts with the way in which I appraise deals. I have missed out on a lot of opportunities because I appraise very conservatively. So that's GDVs with no hope value in them, super comfortable allowances on all the costs, because ultimately you can't bottom everything out at this stage, but you need to be able to look at the big picture and say, do I have, broadly speaking, however I carve this back up, do I have the budget here to deliver this? And then a decent margin behind that. So, because ultimately there will be something and your deal has to be able to absorb it. And it's when your deal can't that, I find that this risk and becomes, sort of deal altering or deal ruining.
Yeah. So your I take point two, the avoiding of risk is you would set your criteria for buying in the first place And if a site or a project doesn't, if you like, tick the right boxes or meet the right threshold, you just avoid that risk by not doing the deal. Is that what the message you're giving?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's some deals where, there's for me, risk is about, what is the risk? It's quantifying that, because as long as you can quantify it and the deal can afford it, it's not a problem. It's, obviously, occasionally you might come across a risk where you think, it's got too much exposure to it. We can't ring fence it enough, or we can't quantify it enough at this early stage, to go ahead. But you can't just avoid risk. You'd either never do a deal, or you've got your head in the sand. You've got to kind of attack the risk head on to then discount the deal or quantify and ring fence that risk. And then it's, I don't really see it as a risk anymore. It's just that, some of the nuance of that particular project.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes perfect sense in terms of attacking the risk and deciding early doors, is it an acceptable risk or is it not? I think that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. Paul, then from your point of view, then obviously Rosie's dealing more perhaps in that other example, 17 units. There's sort of different risk analysis with that type of a project. And what you do, where you're looking for a property, obviously to renovate, how do you initially start from risk, and what sort of risk would mean you avoid a property?
Yeah, I think like Rosie said, what we do, the first thing is we have a risk assessment document that we look through what could go wrong in a project before buying it. If we are buying in an Article 4 area, then we would look to acquire that property in a different way than if the property is not in an Article 4 area. So, for example, if an article is in an Article 4 area, then we would look to control the property in a creative way, like a purchase option. Then we go and ask for the planning permission. Then, so that is a type of kind of risk. And there are risks, as Rosie said, that you can't avoid risk at all. So if a property has a risk of asbestos, then the worst case scenario is you would need more money. You budget more money for that, maybe 5,000 or 10,000 for the asbestos. So yeah, I think the due diligence is the biggest part of our purchase.
Yeah. Okay. I like the fact you said there you have a risk mitigation document. So is that something that you've created yourself, Paul, or have you borrowed that template off someone else? How did you come across that document?
I have created that by myself.
Excellent. Okay. And that just lays out the different things to be aware of. And is it like a scoring mechanism or just list the things to be aware of?
It's a scoring mechanism. If say 1 to 10, if it's a 10, then that is a no go. So, but it's a 1 or 2, then we can manage that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And Rosie, from your side, is that more of a probably analysis spreadsheet, I guess, or have you got a document of sorts, or is that just something that you know from your experience, certain risks are just not worth taking?
I kind of have a due diligence checklist, that I always reference back to make sure I'm, not forgetting about a certain, small element that can then become an issue. And then depending, the results of that are then put into, the financial appraisal, because risk, is normally a financial element. The only other risk is planning. And if it isn't hitting certain kind of green flags, I'm just not taking it on at planning, because again, it's not worth the risk.
Yeah, I was going to say planning risks. Sure, no one's any issues with planning. Sure, we don't.
And mention planning.
Yeah, in this day and age, that is one of the big risks. What we have done in the past, sort of whole segments just on planning, and it's fascinating. I'm not sure if it's getting any better out there, but yeah. Okay, so there's kind of the starter. Um, you know, options of risk mitigation: accept the risk, avoid the risk, or limit the risk. But I think the message that both Rosie and Paul have given here is that you first have got to be able to analyze the risk before you can make a decision to accept, avoid, or limit. And that's really where, would both of you agree that that's probably where some people go wrong, is that they might rush to make a decision on one, two, or three, but they haven't actually understood the risk or successfully analyzed the risk. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of people are so keen to do deals, which is, understandable, that they always like to sort of say, oh, it will be okay. I've got a little allowance here, but they've not kind of thoroughly flushed it out. And yeah, the excitement to do a deal can, bite them in the butt, so to speak, later on.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's somebody to be aware of the impact of the risk. What impact would that risk impact on the deal or on their cash or their finances or their investors' money, if they have any?
Yeah, no, that's a good point as well, Paul, just in terms of identifying the risk, but then what impact would that risk have on the deal, which is a really good point. Okay, so let's sort of get in now to some of the key points that can affect a development or a property project, and we'll just kind of run down these and you don't feel you have to comment on every one of them, or if you've got something sort of major to say on them, we can do that. But I suppose if we take the last number of years, for instance, market risk. Probably Rosie affects you a little bit more in the sense that, Paul, if it's a one property, you can perhaps cope better with the market changing a bit. But if you're building 17 units, Rosie, and you've done a GDV and the market shifts 3 or 4 or 5% down, that can have a pretty big impact on the overall profitability. So, how big is market risk to what you do? And again, how do you try and mitigate that?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest. If you're a new home, if you're a build to sell type developer, yeah, the exit risk is huge because nobody's got, a crystal ball. I think, again, it just comes back to how you appraise that deal in the first instance. So my GDVs are always conservative given the evidence we have today. So there is no, oh, well, house prices always increase by X% per year and new builds always get a 10% premium. We don't apply that whatsoever. It is, what does the sold data say? And then from that sold data, we will consider the market in which it transacted compared to now and compared to what we think it might be in, say, 18 months when we're selling. Again, no crystal ball. So we try to be conservative there so that even if things don't go, the market does downturn a little bit, they're still, reasonable prices. But again, it comes back to that margin so that even if worst case, the market does go down and you have got to drop the prices by 10 grand a unit, for example, on Cambridge, 12 of those are open market. I could drop 100, obviously I don't want to, but if £120,000 dropped off my GDV, it wouldn't put us into a negative profit or an unviable profit margin. We'd still be higher than where a lot of developers purchase at. So it's all in the buying, in my opinion.
Yeah, makes sense. And Paul, just for you on that in terms of market risk, I mean, how do you factor that into your decisions to purchase?
I think we try to buy well, or say where we know that we can add value in our properties. So most of our properties is we buy to and hold. We don't sell. So the risk that we would find is down valuation. So which would mean we'll have more money left in, more of our money or more of our investors' money left in. So that is the only risk that we would have, as we normally tend to buy and hold, not sell.
Okay. So the second one then is financial risk. Paul, we'll just stay with you quickly on this. So financial risk, obviously thinking of different types of funding of the project. So if you've had to go out and do a first charge loan with a lender, or maybe you've even gone to a private investor and given away a first charge, that's a big risk. If the project goes wrong, if you find something in the project you didn't know existed, and all of a sudden you're on the hook financially, or you've got a lender threatening to repossess the property, or you can't make payment, whatever the case may be, is how big a factor is that for you when it comes to projects, the whole financial risk?
Yeah, I think the whole financial risk is the backbone of the project. If the due diligence from the start, well, I mentioned before, if it doesn't start, then we will not be doing that deal. If the risk is so high, yeah. So yeah, that if we are using investors' funds and it delayed, then we'll go back to the investor and try to explain what has happened. But those are in the document that I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And then Rosie, from your point of view, this is a whole different level. So buying one property, obviously has risk. It's requires, research, analysis, decision making, and of course has risk. However, the space that you play in, if you take Hull Barn, sort of 17 units, I mean, your projects are going to have a 8, 9, 10 million GDV. So all of a sudden, when you're signing up for financial funding for a project, you're talking 6, 7, 8 million of maybe senior debt,
Yeah.
equity in the deal. So how do you approach that when it comes to financial risk?
Yeah, so again, very much like Paul said, it's all part of that assessment at the start, is looking at the debt cost. For me, I'm always, I'd say I sit slightly on the more kind of risk averse side when it comes to financial costs, and it'd be very rare for you to see me use a second charge lender, so like a mezz facility or something. I would rather raise the equity, although it's in theory more expensive because of the nature of it. I'm less kind of, personally exposed. So yeah, ultimately it's always a risk, but you can't do the deals without the money. I think the key thing is just always be aware of it, particularly at the exit, when people are always holding out for the highest sales values, but the interest is racking up. You're better off dropping the price, getting them sold quick and getting out of the facility kind of thing. So yeah, it's just a part of it. But again, it's just having a very robust deal that it can withstand, a combination of slight issues, and still, come out the other side. So it's just part and parcel of it.
Yep. Okay. Brilliant. There's some good questions coming in there, which I'll introduce, I think, when it comes to the right section here. So yeah, regarding the sensitivity analysis, we'll do it under the construction risk, I think, which is fine. And regulatory grant. Yep. Okay. So number 3 then, regulatory and legal risks. I suppose this covers the purchase of a property. Paul, you mentioned about sometimes being creative in the purchases. I guess that also then maybe heightens legal risk. So you just want to explain what the example of what you meant by that creative purchase, and then does that give you any exposure legally in terms of control of the asset?
Yeah. So an example is, if this property is in an Article 4 area, then if you go in and buy it blindly without knowing that it's in an Article 4 area, then you run the risk of not doing what you intended to do, to turn it into a HMO, because of is in an Article 4, so where the council has withdrawn. Sorry. So the council has withdrawn that you can't just go and buy a property and just make it a HMO. So we try to acquire that through a purchase option, whereby we will go to the council, or first we agree with the owner, but through a legal process that we control that property. So that once we get the property, then the owner can come back and say, no, this is still our property. So we will mitigate that risk by having a contract drawn by a solicitor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
And Rosie, anything to add on that in terms of how you structure the deals in terms of any legal risks?
Yeah, I mean, legal risk, really comes down to kind of the solicitor side of things. From a legal perspective, it's just having solid contracts. For me, the regulatory risk, the bigger one for us, is that things like building regs or something might change partway through a project, which have kind of, again, like implications, seriously negative implications. But again, the deal should be able to withstand a small degree of this. I'd always recommend to people, as soon as you can, register for building control, because you comply with the building control rules at the point you registered, not at the point you start construction. So I always say to people do that. But, you know, we have seen a couple of deals. You know, I've assessed a couple of student deals on kind of the other side of the business that that they've got planning an unimplementable planning consent because they don't meet the rules around like 2-stair cores and things, and that was because of regulation change. So sometimes you will get caught out, but it's normally in very complex schemes where that might happen. But it's just about having your ducks in a row.
Yeah. Okay. Another aspect of regulatory risk, and like Rosie's right, most people immediately just think of, okay, you know, health and safety and what are the regulations around, you know, the construction and the stipulations that have to be met. Another aspect regarding property projects is the regulatory and compliance aspect around fundraising, and that is an important factor here. I know, Rosie, you're very sensitive about that, and you actually raised some of the equity through a crowdfunding platform.
Yeah.
And that was something you wanted to make sure when it came to financial promotions, speaking to retail investors who maybe hadn't been designated as high net worth, you wanted to make sure that you're in the right side of compliance when it came to that.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. There's a lot of there's a lot of regulation, a lot of FCA rules, and you know, it's easy as a developer to kind of not think of that. I've got enough things to think of, but they are getting hotter on it. And I just knew as we were in the equity raising space, particularly, which is, you know, quite heavily monitored, and we were doing it via social media and talking about it on social media, to then not do it compliantly is just kind of putting a target on our back as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, if we are going to be someone that is raising funds via social media, you know, we want to be kind of a leader in that space and doing it correctly, compliantly. And I think it, you know, instills confidence in the investors as well at the end of the day, the fact that you are doing it compliantly and that you're aware of these things.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's very well put. And I think it's also important to highlight, as I see someone's made this comment or asked it around a question, that you know, that investing in property does come with risk. There are never any guarantees, which is certainly why when there's a crowdfunding raise, they're always very careful phrases and disclaimers and very clear statements that this does come with risk. Everyone who invests through crowdfunding must, you know, pass an appropriateness test where they absolutely say they understand that all their capital is at risk, nothing is guaranteed, and that's if you like, the decision-making process an investor goes through. But I think there's someone's asked a question here, which is a very fair question to ask. You know, what recourse do investors have if a project does go wrong? And certainly there are crowdfunding projects where people have invested funds, and then there have been problems with the project. Sometimes there's even been fraud with the project, and investors have lost their money. I think just in terms of a general comment on that, when people are going to go direct to a developer and then there are problems with the project, then investors are kind of on their own. They're literally chasing a developer who doesn't want to take their call. If it has been done through an FCA authorized platform in terms of crowdfunding, it doesn't guarantee the money's secure. But what you tend to get then is the platform itself or the investors get together and collectively try and hold the developer's feet to the fire. So I think there's a benefit in having invested via a crowdfunding platform or sort of via a crowd structure. But unfortunately, it doesn't guarantee that there won't be, you know, fraud. What it should do is like an early warning system. If the developer is updating the crowdfunding platform about the progression of the project, then when problems arise, then that should be noted earlier. And again, Rosie, I know one thing you're very, very good at is you update your investors. You're on a site visit there recently, because I think you understand the importance, if you've got private investors, that you've got to communicate with them.
Yeah, well, 100%. You know, and ultimately, if you are investing equity, it is on much higher predicted returns than, you know, putting it with a government bond, for example, and higher reward does come higher risk. But, you know, the way you structured the deal with them having like a preferred equity position ahead of the developer, having a hurdle rate, you know, there are certain things you can do to kind of give comfort and show that they are as a priority over you, but ultimately it is not it's equity investment, not secured lending. So
Yeah.
it does inherently carry more risk. But yeah, you build their comfort, and it's very much about also how do you handle things that don't go well? Because if you're in a development deal, or if you do enough, there will be something, and it's how you handle that, and how you handle the investors with that makes them feel comfortable and and trust you.
Yeah, I think you've hit a really good point there, Rosie, which I want to again sort of highlight, given some of the questions asked there, that the good developers with integrity will not run away when the project goes south or there's problems.
Yeah.
They'll front it up. They'll try and address the problems. It doesn't mean investors might lose money. That's outside the nature of the control of the developer. But certainly, in my experience, there are different types of developers, and certainly when I had a crowdfunding platform and we did multiple projects, we had some projects like yourself where there were some delays. Like you were there, you were talking to investors, you were sharing with them, updating them, and we have had other developers who just literally batten down the hatches, stop taking phone calls, investors' money. They just don't care. They literally do not care. They're happy to shaft investors.
Yeah.
That's hard to take when developers act that way, but that's the reality of our market, unfortunately.
Yeah, must be nice for them to sleep so easy at night.
Exactly. That's probably you've hit the nail on the head. Hopefully they don't. In that case,
They probably do. Knowing that type of person, they probably do. They probably sleep like a baby, whereas people like us are like losing sleep over the most minor of things.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. So hopefully that gives a bit of clarity around the question that was sort of posed there about investment and how you can go about if a project goes wrong, what are your options? So okay, so construction risk. In fact, Rosie, we'll just stay with you for this and before going back to Paul, because someone has asked a question around, the analysis, if you like, of the sensitivity analysis for assessing risk, and I suppose particularly around cost overruns, time overruns, that construction side of the project. So is that very often the frustrating side where some things are outside your control, or is that the part that you're good at because you're there on site regularly and you're keeping an eye on it? How do you approach that construction risk?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because there's so many variables within construction risk. I think obviously again it starts at the appraisal stage. So having what is a really healthy budget. I'm often putting in a build cost of £20 a square foot more than what I actually can build at, plus contingency, to allow for things like that. So you're appraising very conservatively from the start to give yourself a healthy budget. In terms of cost overruns, ideally you avoid them, or they're very kind of calculated and ring fenced. So if I've had it occasionally, I might have some provisional sums in a contract. I always ring fence them very tightly in terms of their wording, and even then when they are the cost overrun, it's been £10,000 or something. Because there was a very reasonable allowance for a very tightly worded element of works. So it wasn't, it's when you have ridiculous provisional sums that you've got risk. Overruns in time depends on your procurement and delivery route. Obviously, I like main contracting for many reasons, but one of them is the LAD claims that you can make. If they overrun on their contract period, I can make claims for my costs. But again, at the start, I'm always stress testing an appraisal. I have like a base case, and then I must have about 20 variations where I've moved different needles, basically trying to see what breaks this deal, so that there are allowances. Ideally, they don't happen, but you want to know that if any of these things do happen, or a combination of them, it's not breaking the back of the deal.
Okay, very good. Paul, do you want to add anything to that in terms of construction?
Yeah, I think I would say the construction, the risk is there again, back to due diligence, that if something that would go wrong, then we have insurance. Make sure the builder has his insurance as well. If he burns the house, then you know where to get him, or your insurance will cover. So I think this is part of it, that mitigating the risk, knowing what could go wrong in the construction. Sometimes the builder could go bust. So what would you do if he went bust? If you're using builders from, say, Eastern European, then they might go for their holidays or Christmas holidays when our Christmas is around. So understanding all this mechanism, what would happen, then you will be able to mitigate the risk more.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Okay. I'm gonna just stop share for a while so we get a couple of clips that are more full screen, which is cool. So the next thing then is just around environmental risk. I'm not sure that really affects Paul you that much, does it? Or what do you
No,
think?
no, no,
So
no.
we'll just put Rosie on the spot again then on that one. So
Yeah.
environmental risk, is that something that is increasing at the minute or something that affects you much?
Um, again, guess it depends what you mean by environmental. Do you mean like contamination risk, or do you mean things like BNG policy, or both?
Yeah, I think probably both. So I suppose I mean, I remember a site 4 years ago, fantastic site up in the north of England. And when they did then the soil samples, it turns out that because it had been a garage in a previous life, the big fuel containers were obviously underground, and the whole project just literally, because of the contamination risk, literally the whole thing fell apart. Then right through to green and sustainability of a project.
Yeah, so something like contamination risk, at the very early stages, obviously you want to know what are the historical uses of that site, because that can give you indicators, as to what kind of, costs would, be expected. So if I was appraising a deal that had old tanks in the ground, I'd be allowing minimum probably an extra £200,000 straight away contamination budget. Just at my first appraisal, if I'd seen that it had been a garage, plus all of my other healthy budgets. Obviously, I can then fine tune that, and it might end up being 220,000, 230,000, or it might be 150. But as long as you've got a healthy budget, and then you're appraising to a good margin, and then you get into the details, you get your soil samples, etc. Typically it would be quite unusual for it to be, completely deal breaking, when you get to that stage. I'd always recommend to people, when you get the soil samples, if you have got hazardous material coming back, you're better off spending more money on soil sampling to really break down into like micro piles, because of the tipping costs of, depending what, different tips across the UK can take certain elements, and that can run up a fortune. Spend an extra 15,000 on soil sampling to really break it down, before just going straight ahead with it. So, again, it comes back to the appraisal. Your contract legally, you could say, we've got a maximum allowance of £200,000. We will competitively tender, open book with the landowner for this remediation. But if it's over that that cost overage comes off the land price. You can agree things like that in a purchase contract to protect yourself. I've done that with archaeology before, because that's another similar kind of thing. And then looking at kind of environmental on the other side, like positive environmental, I suppose, more like planning policy, BNG. That just comes down to kind of, educating yourself. What is the policy? What is allowed? What isn't allowed? A lot of people go, oh yeah, like 10% net gain, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. But they don't realize that the site that they've got has a really high level, a high value habitat type, which you can't replace. You can't do offsite credits. You can't replace it on site. Straight away, it's a non-starter of a deal. Whereas other sites, if they've got low level habitat, not a problem. You can replace that. And you may be able to do it on site. You may be able to do it with credit. But it's just understanding the policy, and it's all available out there, and it's not rocket science. Learn it. What is it? What are the implications? How do I apply that? Again, at the appraisal stage, ahead of ever, cross it. You want to cross that bridge, at least conceptually, before you really hit it down the line. You don't want to be surprised by these things.
Yeah, that's very, very useful in terms of your input on that, and yeah, not been surprised. Or early warning signals are always a good thing in development. Okay, so as we push towards an end here, Paul, political and legislative risks. I'm guessing if there's a government policy change on HMOs, that's an obvious one. Has that affected you in recent years, or is it something that you're very conscious of?
Yeah, I think before we buy, we we look ahead what the government is doing in a particular area. So the only thing I would say about the political thing is like a few last it was the last year we had an unrest in the country. There was a lot of demonstration. Then I think what we did is we had to go back to our insurers and see whether we had something to say that if something like that happens and they come to our house, and so we had to ask our insurance to see whether we have that clause. So just that is to mitigate our risk as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and if I just stick with you for number seven on that, um, the properties that you keep, and obviously being aware of if you are selling the properties to a third party, things like tenant, and end user risk. So you've obviously got a very specific niche that you're dealing in that you mentioned earlier. Um, does that add to the risk or not when it comes to that tenant type? And how does that affect the overall project in terms of making sure you have the right tenants in a property?
Yeah, I think again, before before we start the construction, we know our end target, what tenant we need to put in our properties. So we will we will do the due diligence on the tenant as well. So we would not we know or we would know what the tenant would need in that house. So if something happens, then we would downgrade it or over. We do not want to also over specify on the refurb. So
Mhm.
yeah, we our target market is what we will be refurbishing this to that standard. So
Mhm.
if anything was to happen, then we would maybe flip it a bit and put a different client in there or tenant.
Okay, yeah. So you're mitigating risk by being able to put in different types of tenants and yeah, okay, that makes sense. Um, okay, probably back to you, Rosie, for the last one here, and then I'll let both of you summarize before we finish. So, operational and management risk. There's a question come in here which sort of covers that a bit. Which risks on a project typically do you one, mitigate, two, pass on to other parties as subcontractors, three, insure, which is a really good point. Actually, I hadn't thought of that, so thanks for that question. I'll comment on that. Or retain and accept. So, have you any sort of formula around that, or is it just as
So,
and
and
when?
is this specifically in relation to operational risk?
Yeah, yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Um, Sorry, there was like several points.
I
What
know
was the
there was yeah. So it was
what was the first
mitigate.
one?
So mitigate. So what risk on the project would you mitigate? Which
Yeah,
would you pass on to other parties like subcontractors?
yeah,
Which would you insure? And then
yeah,
which do you just accept and get on with it?
yeah. So mitigate. I mean, yeah, mitigating is all kind of site-specific risks. So that would be like a flooding risk. That's a
Hmm.
mitigation factors
Hmm.
within the design. So anything kind of design related, before we actually get to site, what does the site look like? How are we getting certain approvals, hitting building regs? That's all in the mitigation. Broad risk like the ones we've discussed, are all in the actual way of appraising and purchasing. But once you're actually into the deal, personally, I do pass on a lot of the construction management risk by outsourcing to main contractors. Subcontracting directly, in my opinion, is not fun. And it is an absolute skill, and I think probably the hardest part. So I outsource that bit to people who just focus on that all the time. They can be on site all day, every day,
Hmm.
eyes all over it. And just finding contractors with, excellent track records, with quite a lot of transparency around the contracts they have on as well, to try and mitigate that kind of contractor financial risk. And then the risks I pass up on, I guess I never pass upon a risk. I may pass upon a deal because of the risk.
Yeah.
You never just like say, not, don't look at it. Things I've passed up on Certain risks are non-starters. So if you had like, a flood zone 3, non-starter, you're not looking at it. BNG risk, depending on the habitats. That again, it's just like you're not getting planning, so I'm not taking that on. In terms of things that you could probably still get planning, but pose a significant financial risk. It comes down to, if you get the land for very cheap, which has a 50% margin, it might be different, but literally offering on a site at the minute that the price she wants, it makes it too tight with the archaeological risk. So that is one that probably archaeology is probably one of the biggest ones that if you can't ring fence or get the land at such a steal that you could pay £1 million for archaeology and it's fine, I would be walking away from.
Okay, no, very, very clear. On the insurance side, I actually wasn't aware up until a couple of years ago, and I remember being very surprised. But it was a planning deal, quite a significant, I think 40 odd units in South London, and then I was introduced the concept of planning insurance, where you can pay a premium, make your planning application, and providing you actually appeal the planning, you actually can basically have insurance on your planning application, which I thought
Yeah.
was quite interesting. So that's one way where insurance can come to play, and you can use that to mitigate risk.
Yeah, definitely. I have looked at that. I've seen the policies are pretty expensive, and
Very
obviously
expensive.
at that early stage when you're trying to minimize outgoings, that one can be, but it definitely has its place to, depending on the deal. But I think, insurance, contractor all risk insurance, if they go bust, obviously really adequate PI insurances for all of the teams that you're working on. And actually, I've not done it myself, but someone mentioned it, insuring yourself as a director for like basically loss of income in case not for me to necessarily take the money, but where I've seen them use it is, let's say tomorrow I got hit by a car, I hold all the cards on my project, and if I was in a
Mhm.
coma or couldn't function, what would happen? And someone mentioned having like the loss of income policy to allow you to employ someone in your stead.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Typical developer thinking, oh, well, I'll be all right. I don't need the money, but how do I keep the project going? But that, that's things like that, could be valuable to keep the wheels moving.
Yeah. Keep the wheels moving wasn't maybe the right analogy when you're talking about getting hit by a car.
Gotta get on
Let's
with it.
Yeah, let's definitely hope that you do not get hit by a car the next couple of days. But no, an interesting angle on the insurance. So okay, so I'm going to give both of you sort of a one sentence finish. I've just got a couple of brief slides. We'll be done literally in 2 minutes. So you can be thinking of your final words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom around mitigating development risk. And I'll come back to both of you in a second. So, just for those that aren't aware, our latest podcast is out. Absolutely delighted that we've got so many, really, really good people that we've interviewed in recent months. Lorraine Thomas is an absolute star of a person involved in property. I don't know if Rosie, do you know Lorraine at all? Ever come across her?
I've heard of her. I've not crossed paths with her directly myself.
Right. Okay. What about you, Paul? Have you come across
I think I've
Lorraine?
I've seen her on social media, but I haven't come across. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, a phenomenal story of how she got into property. Literally trying to help a family member who wasn't well, and just so popular, full of positivity, and it's a it's one of those podcasts. Rosie, you'll know this from your experience in podcasts. We try and keep them around about an hour. I think hers is about an hour and 15 because it was just
Yeah.
so much good stuff. You just did not want to edit it. It was as simple as that. So I definitely encourage you, if you haven't seen that, jump on our YouTube channel and have a listen into Lorraine. And our next webinar will be on Wednesday, the 16th of April. So that is the next one. So get that in your diary. You'll get a reminder if you're registered. And by all means, join us live if you can. And if you can't join us live, then obviously make sure you watch the recording. So I'll give you both sort of one finished sentence. Paul, go with you first and then finish with Rosie. So just around this subject of mitigating development risk, any takeaways?
Sorry, was that me or
Yeah,
who?
yeah, sorry. Yeah, Paul, you go
Oh,
first.
sorry. I thought it was Rosie. Sorry.
It's all right. That's all right.
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe the key point is plan for the unexpected work or plan for the unexpected, uh, regular site visits, and having reliable builders or team of builders.
Yeah, I think that's good. Rosey?
Yeah, I just think that it'd probably be there's an abundance of opportunity out there. Say no to as many as needed to find the right deal, because all it takes is one deal to go wrong to, at least at kind of the level I'm playing out with PGs and things on the line. All it takes is one deal to go wrong and you wipe out kind of everything. So you're better just waiting patiently, saying no until the right deal comes up than rushing into the wrong deal.
Yeah, perfect. So look, can I thank both Paul and Rosey for joining today? I think there's been a lot of really good points made there. I think if I was to summarize it, Rosey probably made a comment way back at the start, I think in opening remarks, which I thought was a really good way of putting it, that it's very rare there's one problem in a development or a project that causes it to really go off the rails. It's that death by a thousand cuts, that if there's multiple issues around risk, they all can, if you like, mount up to a point then that the project was underwater or isn't, just isn't profitable. So I think that's a really good takeaway. Don't be homed in on just one thing. You've got to look at all the moving parts of a development, and make sure you're mitigating the risk where you can, passing on the risk, which Rosey is pointing out, where appropriate, or sometimes making that decision, Paul, as you were saying, of just not to buy the land or the property in the first place because, yeah, the risk is just too high. So I think that's some of the key takeaways. So listen, thanks again for joining. It'll be on our YouTube channel within about an hour. And until next month, everyone take care. Wish you every success. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.